Welcome to the special report with Areva Martin. I'm your host, Areva Martin. On June 16, 2026, the federal government announced that responsibility for overseeing special education would move from the U.S. Department of Education to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Now, some supporters say that this change could actually improve the coordination of services for children with disabilities. However, critics, including myself and lots of other parents, educators, disability advocates, and lawmakers from both parties, have raised serious concerns about what the move could mean for accountability and accessibility of special educational services and the educational rights that all parents are guaranteed. In the first episode of this three-part series, The Schoolhouse Door, we examine why this decision matters and what it could mean inside America's classrooms. Today, we're focusing on the people who live with the consequences of special education policy every single day. And those people are parents. Parents like myself who had a son who received public school services and special education services from the time he was in kindergarten until the time he aged out of his local high school. Because special education is not ultimately about federal agencies, organizational charts, or bureaucratic structures, it's about children. It's about whether a child receives speech therapy when it's needed, whether a child receives behavioral support when it's promised, whether a child receives the accommodations necessary to learn, to communicate, and ultimately to succeed, and whether parents have somewhere to turn when those services aren't delivered. For nearly 50 years, special education has been rooted in a simple promise. Children with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate public education. Many of you know that as FAPE. Now, this promise is protected by federal law, but laws only matter when someone is responsible for enforcing them. And that's why the June 16th decision has generated so much concern among families across the country. Joining me today are two Los Angeles mothers raising children on the autism spectrum. Are actively advocating for services their children need, not yesterday, but services they need today. And both of these moms are navigating challenges with their school districts right now. And both have a unique perspective on what accountability means when you're fighting for your child. I want to thank Denise and Tamara for joining me today. Let me start with you, Denise.
My son's name is Angel. He's 10 years old. He got diagnosed when he was 3 years old. So it was kind of during COVID. It was a challenge because he was doing well in the speech department the first month, and then COVID hit, and they wanted to do it through Zoom. That was a challenge because my son cannot sit still, and he did not like being on the camera. So we got what is it called? Discharged from there, and it kind of just took all those years before we could get services again to be in person. Is where he did well. Um, he was supposed to start kindergarten with his district during the COVID. He didn't get a chance to because they were required to wear masks. And he was going through a phase at that time where he could not wear that, or he was going through that phase of spitting, and everybody could not have that. So I kept him home during that time, and we just did ABA services. ABA in the home setting didn't work for us, and it took us a while. Even when he started school, it was a challenge at first with the district because they had to do all their assessments, and I had requested him to have a one-on-one. That took like about 3 years maybe of his school, little first 3 years. He was very high function. I mean, not high functioning. Sorry, he had high behaviors, and he was very high at elopements. He would always escape whenever given the chance to. So that's why I had requested that one-on-one service. When we finally got it, it was still a challenge for him to have that. And then we were doing the home services through the ABA. It wasn't until we finally went to the clinic and he finally started to show signs of improvement.
Let me ask you this, Denise. How old was your son when you had your first IEP at his school?
He was around 6 or 7. It was first grade.
First grade.
Yeah.
Okay. And since that time, approximately how many IEP meetings have you sat through trying to get services for your son?
I would say the third or fourth time for the IEPs, the yearly ones, when we finally got it. I had to do my own research for IEPs, like to understand it and everything. And then I seen your company have the resources for learning about the IEPs, where we would, it was just, I think, 2 hours long, and you can ask them questions as well. It was very helpful, especially for, having a child on the spectrum and being new to, everything that's expected of the IEPs. It breaks it down to how you can understand it better. Um, it lets you know to to know the chain of command at the schools, so that way the case manager, who is a teacher, gives you her input on it. Then you have to deal with the school psychologist who does the assessments. So, for me, it was a little bit of a struggle, for the fact that, you know, when they do their assessments, they go off the data that's collected. That data, I feel, was a little bit difficult for me to understand, because they're only there with the child for so long to do the data collecting. And the teacher and the parent are the ones that know more or less what the kid is capable of doing, or what he does on a daily. So it was frustrating also because, these kids, they have their good days, they have their bad days. And I feel, for the most part, during those years, that it was more of, they were catching him at a time where he was not at his high elopement and his high behaviors. You would see very little bit of it from the data collection. So what the teacher was doing that was very helpful is that she would write like daily notes for all the kids. So I was told by the advocate for the IEP classes, to keep those, because those help your case. And requesting a one-on-one for my son, all of that helped. And even speaking
Right,
to
because
a
you had those
supervisor.
notes.
Yeah.
Right, you had those notes that showed his behavior. What do you wish, Denise, that people in the school setting, in these IEPs, understood about your child that they might not see right away? Is it that he does have these behaviors that cause him to egope, that maybe on any given day may not be visible to whoever's doing an evaluation? Is that one of the things that you wish they understood about your child?
Yes. I wish that it wouldn't be like, I'm not sure exactly how much time they spend each day, or when they do those visits. I wish it wasn't too short. I wish they would be able to observe the children a little bit longer during the day. Maybe during the teacher's understanding of the high peak of those behaviors, so that way they can know that, it's very serious, and not just, hey, I'm being told this, but I'm not seeing it. Because that's what's very frustrating for us parents. Like for my son, it was very frustrating for me, because at that time he was running like the whole campus, and he tries to hide sometimes, which is not safe.
Yeah,
And
safety issues.
yes, and that was a big concern for me, not just for him, but for those around him. So my son was also um, climbing the playgrounds on the unsafe sides. And then he started climbing the school fences. I'm not sure how high he got up to the school fence on the street side, like, trying to get over, but, it was a big concern for me. I had to put a tracking device on him because it made me feel a little bit safer to know that he was still on campus. Um, because I've heard stories, from
Right.
friends that, hey, my autistic son actually got out of school, and that's why I pushed for the one-on-one because I knew how my son was. They
Right.
they had said, well, we don't want him to be dependent on it, and that's not exactly what I wanted for. I wanted it more for his safety and the safety of the students in the class because when my son, would get high behaviors and get upset for whatever it was that upsetted him, he would take it out on whoever was close by. So it got very concerned. I got very concerned about it because he started throwing tables over, chairs, biting and stuff. And, I didn't want him to hurt nobody else, especially another
Right.
child
No,
on the spectrum. So
no, absolutely.
I made it
So
very
let's
clear to them that, I need somebody not there to like hold his hand and, keep him from being independent. I'm all for my son to be independent, but I need that honestly more for to stop him from hurting somebody.
No, definitely understood. Let me bring you into the conversation, Tamara. Tell us about your child and your journey with the IEP process.
Hey, good morning. So my son is currently 6 years old. His name is Lorenzo Garcia. Um, so his diagnosis he received when he was about 3 years old. I got it through the regional center, and then they basically just gave him the diagnosis. And because he was over, I think, about to turn 4, they said to go to the local school district to request his services and get his IEP. But so then we went to his local school to request an IEP, and then they just kept telling me we have to wait till school opens months and months. And just to get him assessed, I had to take a written paper and turn it into the front office and have it stamped. And then I believe after that, a month later, they did do an IEP, but they didn't take good care of him. Every time I would go to the school, he would just be eloping out the classroom. One time I picked him up, he was climbing over the fence, took off all of his clothes, and they would just text me every day about some behaviors he's having in class.
So sorry to hear that, Tamara. I want to ask both of you, when you first learned of your child's diagnosis and realized that he would have to get special education services from your local schools that you were sending your kids to, did you think this process was going to be easy? I mean, did you have any expectation that it would be as challenging as it has been? Denise, I'll start with you.
It was very scary for me because I knew he had elopement issues and they were very high. That was my main concern. I wasn't sure if anybody was going to be able to be as quick as my son and keep my son safe and keep him there. So I didn't really
So you
expect
didn't have
them.
high expectations of the IEP process being able to help your child, or were you hopeful that
No,
maybe
it was kind
it
of like
would?
both. It felt overwhelming. Um, you know, just the whole process. It's a lot to do for us parents. We have to. It's like a full-time job. You have to. It, I don't even know the words to explain it. It's just very overwhelming because you have your son that you're already overwhelmed with trying to help communicate and keep safe and everything. So putting your child in another person's hands, multiple people, you're not sure what to expect. You're hopeful that everything will go good. Um, and it was at first, okay, the first month once I started seeing that he was okay there. But then once you start hearing about the elopements, even higher than usual, at school, it gets more concerning.
And what about you, Tamara? Were you initially hopeful that the IEP process would go smoothly?
No, I already knew based on research I would have to like request services, but I didn't know that I would have to keep like requesting multiple APs, trying to get his services. It's been a process, and since he's been in school, His behaviors were just out of hand in general. Behaviors I didn't even see at home.
So you think being in the school setting, he's developed some additional behaviors. What happens when you go to the IEP meeting and tell the team that you're seeing these additional behaviors? Do you feel like you're getting the kind of support that you need?
No, based on his last IEP, he was placed in a general ed classroom, and I felt like that was just overwhelming for him. They did create like a calming corner for him, but I didn't feel like that was the right placement for him.
And I know, Denise, you said something very powerful. You said this is like a full-time job. And you're right. So many parents explain this process in those very same words. In my 15 plus years of doing this, I know many parents who've had to quit their jobs, their real full-time jobs that they need to pay their rent and to pay for transportation and food, to be available, because sometimes you have to go to 2 or 3 meetings in any given month, or you have to be available for appointments and, being engaged with your school. Has there ever been a time when you just wanted to kind of give up on the IEP process, where you were so frustrated or so discouraged by it?
I was at first. When my son, before he went to the clinic in Willowbrook, um, with the IEPs and my son not really showing improvement in the home setting for the ABA, and also at OT, like it was very overwhelming. I was telling our supervisor at the time, Linda, I was like, I'm done. Like I'm feeling I'm getting beat by it, by everything. Like I'm not seeing improvement. My son's behaviors are becoming overwhelming, and to hear that majority of the time, every day at school, that the behaviors are getting out of control. There's new behaviors coming that I didn't even know he did. Just different things that he started picking up or, developing. It was very overwhelming, and I was ready to, quit altogether. I was thinking of homeschooling him or, because I was just so overwhelmed and frustrated. I wasn't seeing, an outlet that would benefit my son at the time. Um, so what I did was, at that IEP meeting, the last one, before he was granted his one-on-one, I had told Linda that, I wanted to take Angel to the clinic. That was, my last resort. So I would have to travel to take Angel every day he goes to get the help that he needs. I even had to cut his schooling into half, basically. So I pull him out at 12 and have him go to ABA, and that all of that just kind of like fell into place after that. I
Mm.
mean, I still have struggles here and there with certain services for the IEPs, but for the most part now it's starting to kind of line up
You're
until,
finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm really
yeah.
glad to hear that. I hear the frustration. I know how much time this takes, as you've just indicated. And that's why one of the reasons families are paying close attention to this June 16th decision is because accountability matters. When schools don't deliver what is written in an IEP or what should be written in an IEP, the big question is, where do parents turn? So for you, Tamara, when you are telling the school that this general education class isn't an appropriate setting for your son, did you feel like there was someone that you could go to, that would hear you and that would take action?
No, every day I would just get messages like about his behaviors. I eventually had to pull him out of school and put him in ABA full time. I was waiting for him to actually get placement in the ABA team, and I would drive to Whittier and Easter Seals about 45 minutes every morning, just to get him his behavioral therapy.
Wow. One of the themes that keeps emerging in this conversation is how much time that parents have to take. And again, time away from jobs, time away from other children that they may be raising, time away from their family. And not that it's anyone else's responsibility to raise our kids, but this system makes it so cumbersome, so burdensome, so difficult for families to navigate. I don't know about you, Denise and Tamara, but I have two neurotypical kids, and putting them in school was easy peasy. You just sign up, you have a parent night occasionally, but the time required for my son Marty, who's on the spectrum as well, is disproportionate, I think, to any amount of time that families can imagine if you haven't had to go through the special education process. What for you, Denise? What do you think would make this IEP process, the school process, more responsive, would make it better and more accountable to parents?
Honestly, I'm not even sure how to answer that. It's kind of, it's just difficult.
Well, let me ask you differently. Do you wish that there was someone in that meeting who, one, would listen to you when you tried to tell about your son's elopement and the issues that he was having, and maybe even have some place where you could go if that team, that IEP team wasn't listening, somewhere where you could call, you could contact and say, this is what's happening and I need someone to intervene. Would that have helped, you think?
Yes. Okay, so when I wasn't being heard about the one-on-one, I just kept speaking with his teacher because that's the one I can best talk with about his daily behaviors and elopements and, get to know what I can't see at my son's school because they would ask if I would want to volunteer. I wasn't able to be able to see for myself what he was doing in class to, have that stronger, um, you know, what do they call evidence basically of, how to speak for my child. Because he would think if I showed up, it was time to go home. So I couldn't go and see for myself how he acted in class. But I was very close with the teachers to, get the input. And then, I would speak with the psychologist as well, that would do the assessments. And, even though I'd be very frustrated because I wasn't getting the one-on-one, I was still able to talk to him. But it was just a process, and all that data that needed to be collected. So if I couldn't, when I wasn't still getting the result that I wanted, I started speaking with like supervisors, and also our district, they offer classes for, the children on the spectrum of different things. So with those meetings, I was able to find out the chain of command. So it's also SELPA. So I also would speak with them in regards to my concerns, and then they would best guide me um, the next step to take.
And so, Denise, listening to all the advocacy, so first of all, kudos to you for being such an incredible advocate for your son, for seeking out classes, whether they were offered through a nonprofit organization or through the school district where your son was a student. You obviously did the work, you put the time in. So when you hear this story about moving special education services out of the education department into another department, a health and human services department, that worries a lot of parents because the concern is the accountability is already difficult. Enforcement is already difficult. So, what questions would you have to our lawmakers about this change?
My question is why? Why move it? It's already complicated for us parents, just for me, I feel like just make our lives a little bit easier and, understand where we're coming from, not just, you know, okay, well, we're going to do this. We don't need to do that for the parents or, the children. I feel like they should be more understanding, about our children and moving it. I just don't, I can't understand why change
No,
it.
that's a great point. And Tamara, do you think the average American family who doesn't have a child with special needs has any idea about how much advocacy and time parents like you and Denise have to spend in IEP meetings advocating for your children?
No, I don't think they do. I have two other kids that are not on the spectrum, and compared to my son that is on the spectrum, it is a whole nother level of advocacy you have to do. I quit my job just to give him his services during the day.
You
Wow.
have to work
And I hear,
around that child's schedule because,
Yes.
you can't, the jobs. Okay, so for me, the little bit of hours that I have to myself, it's not enough time for a job. I get like 3 hours while they're at school. And then, after that, you go to therapy and, there's just no time. There's no time for a job. There's nobody's going to give you a job for 3 hours or 2 hours, and it's hard. And like how you said, the, I didn't understand the full aspect of having to do our own research because I have 2 other children. No, I have 3 other children that are not on the spectrum. So this whole being on the spectrum and having to advocate so hard for your child, it's overwhelming. And, nobody spends enough time trying to understand a parent's view of how much time, how much everything, physical, mental, emotionally, this takes a toll on us. And, no one's going to do it for us better for our children than us because we're with our children most of the time and nobody sees the things that we do. And that's what kind of overwhelms us parents, when the things our children should receive without having to turn purple from holding our breath from fighting to get it.
No, so true. Tamara, what would happen if you stopped advocating for your child in school settings? If you stopped pressing the educators and the administrators through this IEP process, if you stop, all the work that you're doing right now for your child, what would happen?
I felt like my son wouldn't progress in his needs or just receive like the proper placement he should have given.
So, Denise, for new moms and new dads who may be just getting a diagnosis, maybe at the beginning of their journey, what advice would you give them?
My advice is, like for my son, when he turned 3 years old, I wish I had somebody to tell me to start doing the research for the IEPs, but I figured because he was so little, that wasn't any time to be thinking about. But I wish somebody did tell me, like, more or less the steps or where I can get the information right away for the IEPs, because doing the research myself, it's helped a lot. I've learned that you should create a binder with all his IEPs, all those notes and everything, and have it so that way you can reflect back on it, because there's some services that might not be met, or they might not be doing it correctly, or the amount of time that the child gets. So that's good to know, like, hey, is he getting these hours? If they're not, I mean, not the hours, the minutes. If he's not getting what he's supposed to be getting, then, you can talk to the supervisor about that. Another thing is I found out to, always know a lawyer that you can, speak with in case you need it. And I was told also that there's sometimes a waiting list, to get a lawyer to help you with your case.
Just wish somebody had given you more information about how difficult the process would be and how much work you would have to do to gather information, collect information, and have that information available. Yeah, I felt the same way when I started my journey with Marty in the IEP process. Tamara, if we had a chance, you and I and Denise, to sit down and talk to those policymakers, those lawmakers that made the decision on June 16th to change the way special education services are administered in our public school setting, to move them from our Department of Education to our Department of Health and Human Services. What would you want those people to understand about this journey as a parent? And not about the politics, not about the agencies, but really about the journey that parents are on.
For me, I think I would just want them to understand that if they take that away from our children, our children are already at a disadvantage. And by taking the funds, by taking the services away from us, it's just going to make life harder for our children. And, they can spend money on all these wars and helping everybody else, but I honestly feel like they should just help our special needs children, or, they need it.
No, absolutely. And what about you, Tamara? I'll give you the last word. What would you want those policy and lawmakers to know about this journey of getting services in a school setting when you have a child with special needs?
Honestly, I would just hope that they know, like, they will have better trained staff to be there for your child, or just realize the time we spend to try and get them their services. I honestly don't feel like he should return to school. I was thinking about homeschooling him just because at the school they weren't giving him his proper services.
Yeah, that's a decision a lot of families ultimately have to make. So, in the first episode of this series, The Schoolhouse Door, we examined that June 16th, 2026 decision to move the federal oversight of special education from the Department of Education to the Department of Health and Human Service. And we explore why so many educators, advocates, and families have concern about that change. Today, we've heard from two parents actually living this reality every day, parents who have shown us that the special education process is already deeply flawed and deeply difficult to navigate. They've talked about their own personal struggles, their challenges in getting services for their children. And this reminds us that the rights written into law only matter when families can access them and when someone is accountable for protecting them. In the final episode of this series, The Schoolhouse Door, we're going to speak with special education and civil rights attorneys about what rights families still have, how those rights are enforced, and what parents can do when they believe their child is not receiving the education the law guarantees. We're also going to talk about why having a Health and Human Services secretary administer special education services is not the way we fix this system. No doubt about it. Our special education system is broken and needs to be fixed, needs more resources, needs more accountability, but it needs that from educators, not healthcare professionals, because what our children go to school for and what we send our kids to school for is for them to be educated. And we want that education to be governed by those folks who understand education, who've studied education, and who are immersed in the field of education, not by doctors and not by nurses. There's a place in our special needs children's lives for medical practitioners. All of us have therapists that we see outside of school. All of us have doctors that we see outside of school. But we don't want those doctors trying to educate our children, no more so than we would want educators trying to provide medical advice for our kids. There's a lane for both of these professionals in the lives of our children. And we're just asking the White House, asking the administration to respect the needs of families and respect the needs of educators, and to allow this system to be fixed, to give it the resources and the financial budget that is needed to fix this system. Because every child deserves the opportunity to learn, every child deserves the opportunity to succeed, and every family deserves to know that someone is responsible for making sure that those rights are protected. Again, this is Areva Martin, and this is the special report. And thank you so much to Denise and Tamara for joining us. Thank you for sharing your advocacy story. Thank you for what you are doing to help inspire other families who are on this journey.